most important podcast I have ever done is coming up right now, so stick around.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, I'm Chuck Holton. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone podcast. This is, we're getting into the new year. We're into our third year now of this podcast. And like I said in the intro, I don't think there is a more important episode that I have done in over 400 episodes of this podcast. You're going to want to listen to this one all the way through. We're going to talk about some really uncomfortable things here. And there's just, I started this podcast to inform you about crises and disasters around the globe. In the last year, much of the reporting I've done on this podcast has been right here in the United States. And that's partly because COVID kept me from traveling, but also because there has been a lot of unrest in the U.S. over the last 12 months. And I think we're fixing to see quite a bit more. I am not one to make dire predictions. I learned a long time ago when I was a stockbroker that A, I'm not very good at predicting the future, and B, things rarely end up being as bad as you think they might get. And so it doesn't pay to make doom and gloom forecasts about the future. But what I want to talk to you about is a looming crisis in America that really threatens our entire democracy, our entire way of life, the Constitution that we hold so dear. And all I'm doing in what I'm about to talk to you about is extrapolating out the threads that I see in American culture today, especially in our politics. And I'm just drawing those lines I see going like this, and I'm extending them out into the future and seeing where they intersect. And I'm very concerned because I've had a few conversations lately with people who are much more knowledgeable than I am about this topic. I've had conversations with sitting U.S. congressmen. I had conversations with people that are deep into the firearms industry, who are deep into the political realm, and they're all sort of saying the same thing, which concerns me greatly. Now, we all know that I guess tomorrow, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. And some people are maybe happy about that. Some people are not. Some people might just be excited for the fact that they don't have to listen to Donald Trump bloviate on Twitter anymore. I'm in that group, I'd say. As much as I was surprised pleasantly by Donald Trump's policy decisions and by the things that he did in office, as a human being, I found Donald Trump to be pretty distasteful. And so I'm not going to miss him personally, but I am definitely going to miss his policies. I try really hard not to make this podcast about politics. I try not to make it political. It's supposed to be about crisis and conflict around the world, because crisis and conflict is where you find people that are absolutely destitute, that are having their worst day ever. And I've always felt like the most that I can do, I could go and I could bring a little money, I could bring a little help, a little bit of aid or something to people who are losing everything. But the most I can bring them is the knowledge that I'm taking their story to the whole world. And what we've found through this podcast is that through the wonders of modern technology, you can reach through this podcast and directly help the people who are in need in places where they're hurting the most. And that's a powerful, powerful concept, and people seem to really love it. I do. So for example, I just got off the plane 24 hours ago from Armenia. I spent 2 weeks over there reporting on the conflict that just ended. That's actually, it hasn't ended, it just sort of stopped for the time being. Will probably flare back up soon. Between Armenia and Azerbaijan. You've heard me talk about it a lot if you watch this podcast. We were able to help a bunch of Armenians who are really desperate because the combination of war and COVID in their country has really crushed their economy to a point where people are looking at going hungry throughout this winter. And it's a cold, brutal winter over there. So we were able to help people who didn't expect it and really make some people's day because you guys gave. We took that money, we gave it to refugees, thousands of dollars we were able to help people with over there. And even more important than just giving people money, we were able to buy their products and give them some dignity to earn a living, and then brought that over here and bring those products back to the United States. So that's really great. And that's what I'd like to do with this podcast. But there's a crisis here in the United States that is looming, that is unlike, I think, anything we've ever seen before. And it's the threat to our natural, God-given right to defend ourselves and our loved ones. I'm talking about your Second Amendment. Now, most of you probably know, some of you know at least, that I spent 6 years working for the National Rifle Association as a correspondent, doing basically what I'm doing now. What I did wasn't focused specifically on guns or gun policy or anything like that. It was focused on bringing news of crises from around the world and trying to figure out what people who are Second Amendment supporters could learn from those crises. And one of the things that I learned doing that job is that countries who, the few countries who have enshrined in their founding documents the right to keep and bear arms, there's only a few of those. But those that do, many of them have de facto taken that right away by legislating it out of existence. So the right still exists on paper, but it is no longer practical or practicable as a right for the people of that country. Mexico is a good example of that. They have something like our Second Amendment in their constitution, but there's only one gun store that's allowed to sell guns in the entire nation, and it costs about a year's salary to get all the permits it needed to buy a gun, and then you can only own a gun that's .38 caliber or less. And if you have seen any news out of Mexico, you know that that policy has done nothing to stop gun violence in the country. It's probably done just the opposite, as a matter of fact, by disarming law-abiding citizens and making them vulnerable to the capricious whims of the corrupt government and the cartels who basically own the corrupt government and the people by default. When you look at the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms, this is something that has really become something of a sacred right to many people in the United States. And gun ownership right now in the U.S. is probably as high as it's ever been. Probably more than 40% of homes in America have a gun in the house. There are more guns than people in America. And you know, most states have done a lot, especially in the last 4 years, in making the ability to not just own a gun, but carry a gun and use a gun, God forbid, if you are threatened or your family is threatened, to make that right more accessible to people of all economic strata. Many countries like Panama, for example, they have gun rights in Panama, the right to gun ownership, but it's a very elitist policy because of the costs involved in buying a gun and getting the permits and that sort of thing. It pretty much limits gun ownership legally to the top 1% of the population. So it's very elitist. And the people who live in bad neighborhoods that are single parents that probably need a gun most for self-defense, that's just far out of reach. We now are looking at a we're looking at an administration, or at least for the next 2 years, and probably for a lot longer, we're looking at the hardcore leftists owning all three branches of government. And so they will have the ability to pass regulations and laws with impunity. And probably the only thing that stands in their way is the Supreme Court of the United States, thank heaven, at least until the leftists are able to change the number of justices and elect 9 more justices to the Supreme Court or something, and pack it with hardcore leftists, and then that will be gone as well. So the Senate, the House, and the executive branch are all in the hands of the left now, and so they can pass laws as fast as they possibly can for the next 2 years. Now, I have always said I'm not really worried about them repealing the Second Amendment or anything like that, because there are just too many people who own guns. And who's going to go and confiscate those things? I mean, if you're a cop and the mayor or the president, it doesn't matter, says, go house to house and take people's guns away, and you know that probably at least 1 in 10 of those houses is going to give you the ammunition first at about 1,500 feet per second, you know you're not going to survive the day. So you're just going to choose not to enforce that law, call in sick, whatever. That's not going to fly. But in speaking with a U.S. congressman, friend of mine today, for about an hour on the phone, and he said, Chuck, that's not how they're going to do it. They don't need to confiscate your guns. They don't need to pass a law to confiscate them. They just need to pass a law that says you've got until such and such a date to turn in your weapon, and they'll start by nibbling away at it and say, if your weapon is this caliber, or it looks like that, or it has scary accoutrements on it, or it has a magazine capacity of this, or just whatever. They'll nibble away at the edges, and anything except your hunting rifle and your .22 and your shotgun or something like that. Bottom line is, they'll say, well, if you don't turn your gun in by this time, then the consequences of that will be exactly what we have seen over the last few weeks, and what the left has done to Donald Trump and to many conservatives and Trump supporters. Your social media will be taken down. You will be banned from public discourse. You will probably have a really hard time getting a job. You won't be able to renew your driver's license or your passport. Maybe there will be a large tax placed on ammunition to the point where it's just cost prohibitive to even buy the stuff or train with it. And even if you are able to buy it, you'll have to register like you do in California. You'll be limited to a certain number of rounds, et cetera, et cetera. And it will just get to the point where people will say, I like the ability to keep and bear arms, but I also like the ability to eat. And I can't get a job as long as I don't toe the line. If I'm going to be... when they passed a law that in New York a few years ago that required citizens who had AR-15 platform weapons to turn them in, something like only 2% of the people complied. But that's because there wasn't a whole lot in the way of enforcement or teeth in that law. But what if they said, you have to turn in your weapon, and if you don't, you won't be able to get health care. You'll be denied health care. If you don't, you won't be allowed to put your children in school. If you don't, you won't be allowed to join a trade union. If you don't, you won't be able to renew your passport or your driver's license. Basically, you will be shut out of the global community. If you don't, the bank will refuse to give you a loan or even a bank account. That's what we're looking at, people. That is what is going to happen in America unless something drastic changes. And we may be beyond the point of no return at this point, because the election has happened, and leftists have made very clear that their agenda is to make it virtually impossible for you to own a firearm, especially the kinds of firearms that they don't like. Now, they're using the riots that happened on January 6th on Capitol Hill as justification already for firing people, putting people in jail. A friend of mine, Cashley Kelly, went to Washington, D.C. and probably went too far. I mean, he broke probation to go there, so, you know, he's got a special case. But the bottom line is he got picked up by the FBI. He's being held in jail and taken away from his 12 children because he attended a First Amendment, a rally which should have been his First Amendment right to do. He wasn't violent. He didn't break things. He didn't, you know, whatever. But he was arrested. And worse, even worse, there were some school teachers here in West Virginia, up in Charleston, who went together to this rally and attended the rally. They didn't break into the Capitol building. They didn't set anything on fire. They didn't assault police officers. They went to the rally. They waved their flags. They chanted. They had a good time. They got back in their van and they came back to West Virginia. And when the school superintendent found out that they had attended the rally without any further evidence of any wrongdoing, the school superintendent fired every one of them. Put them all on, you know, just put them all out of work. Now, there are some court cases that have been brought about that are pending, and hopefully that'll be overturned, and hopefully that superintendent will never work in politics again. But this is the kind of thing we're seeing happening already. This is exactly what the leftists have in mind for America. And you look at China's social credit, what they're doing with in terms of social credit, where even just watching your Facebook posts and what you post on social media can keep you from being able to travel, can keep you from being able to get a job. You know, at some point people will say, you know, it's just too much. I value my right to keep and bear arms, but I value my desire to eat even more and feed my children. And so if it's a choice between the two, I'm just going to have to choose to eat and give up my right to a firearm. And what's the answer to this? I wish I knew. Obviously, violence is not the answer. You can vote at the ballot box. We tried that. We may never see a legitimate election in our country again if they go like this last one went. Without a shadow of a doubt, this election was very, very heavily fraudulent. And I say that because of information that I've gathered from people that are high up in government, from people that are in some of these states, and from my own experience in watching voter fraud take place during the 2012 election in Detroit. We know voter fraud is happening, and we know that it happened in this last presidential election on a massive scale. It doesn't matter. We vote at the ballot box, it doesn't do any good. Your other options are vote with your feet, which means move to a place where you can have more freedom, or at least more power to influence the political environment. That's one option. Voting with a rifle is the absolute last resort, and I hope it never comes to that. Nobody who has ever seen war would wish for war in any sense. And I've seen a lot of war, people. And let me tell you, it is ugly. And you don't want that. You don't want it. But if war comes, let it come in my time so that I can face it and not my grandchildren. That's a paraphrase of a quote that I've heard throughout my military career. And let me tell you, nobody wishes for peace more than the soldier. So pray for peace. Prayer is the most we can do, always, especially at this point, though. Pray for a revival, not a revolution. We need a revival in America, not a revolution, people. A lot of people are calling for a revolution. Revolutions are very bloody, very painful, very dirty, and they damage the psyche of a nation. They damage the culture of a nation for generations. I've learned that eminently in the last couple of weeks in Armenia. You don't want what war will do, especially a civil war, to our nation. We don't want that. The other possibility is that perhaps the country balkanizes and separates into several different nations, the nation of Texas, the nation of the Pacific Northwest, I don't know. I don't see how that could happen without violent armed conflict, because the federal government is not going to give up without a fight. They're not going to do that. Let's pray that we never see Americans fighting Americans in the streets. It may very well happen. I hope not. Pray for America, folks. Be peaceable. Love your neighbor. Reach out and push people up and encourage them. And trust in God. The Bible says, put not your faith in man, but in the word and the power of God. So I guess that's all I've got for today, folks. We're going to have some good podcasts coming out here in the next couple of weeks, because I'm heading down to the southern border and I'm going to be reporting on the migration crisis. One thing that's positive about the next 4 years is it's going to be job security for a war correspondent. There's going to be plenty of crises to go around. I would recommend that you stock up on ammunition, food, firearms, and those things that may very well get scarce very soon. Might be too late. So that's all the doom and gloom I've got for today, folks. I love you. I appreciate every one of you guys. Thanks for being a part of the podcast, part of the Hot Zone. Let me also highly encourage you to go over to move off of the major social media networks, Facebook and Twitter, and to move to Signal and to, I want to say transfer. It's not transfer. I just spaced on it. I'll put links in the bottom. It's late at night. My brain quit working. Sorry. So just, Telegram, Signal and Telegram. You want to move over to Signal and Telegram. Get off of WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter. I am moving this podcast over to Telegram because it will allow me to put up a lot more than just videos or just audios. It'll allow me to put up photographs and text and everything like that. It's like combining Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and WhatsApp all into one app, where you can have more contact with me directly, and we can be in this together. We can stay in this together throughout whatever is about to come. So yeah, I highly encourage you to go find the Hot Zone podcast on Telegram and subscribe over there, because we're pushing more and more content over there, stuff that you're not going to see on any of the other channels. And I would not be surprised if we get deplatformed from those other channels before too long. So if we disappear, you can find us on Telegram. And so we'll see you there. Thanks for watching.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.